I'm so excited to share these books with you. Hi everyone, my name is Kayla. Welcome back to Kay's Hidden Shelf, where we talk about books. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the books that I read in July, and what a reading month it was. I think I only had one book that was a 3-star, but everything else was a 4-star and up, and it was phenomenal. I found some new great series that I'm really eager to continue into, some new great books. I'm just excited to talk to you about it. I also apologize in advance. I am getting over a cold, so my voice might sound a little bit weird. I'm going to try and do my best to keep my voice as clear as possible, but I really need to share these books with you, and also this is a little bit late. And without further ado, let's just dive in and talk about these books. The first book that I read in July was In the Orbit of Sirens by T.A. Bruno. This is a self-published sci-fi, and we follow humanity's struggle for survival. This is a SPS FC finalist, a space opera, and a little bit of horror mixed in there too, which I loved the combination of all of this, along with the characters' search and struggle for survival out amongst the stars. A perfect mix of imaginative world building, captivating storytelling, and some spine-chilling scenes, all of which kept me on the edge of my seat. It also comes together beautifully in an accessible writing style, so if you've been looking to try some sci-fi, maybe an indie book as well, this is one I would highly recommend, and I'm going to explain why. This story follows two main characters, though there are 3 POVs throughout, and the first one being Denton Castus, a young man who is a starship mechanic. He is hoping to flee his current home to a distant planet in hope of refuge, along with other members of humanity. On this distant planet, Eliana Veston is one of the many scouts who have been sent to this distant planet to get it ready for the colonists to come. Unfortunately, they've met with a roadblock, being a plague that is killing off colonists. In their hunt for a cure, they release a threat to humanity, the Sirens, mysterious beings who have great power and a deep hatred for invaders. In the Orbit of Sirens is book 1 in the Songs of Kamaria trilogy, which the final book in the trilogy recently released as well. This is just an epic way to start a series. I have to say, it is one of the most thrilling and on the edge of my seat books I have read in quite some time. There is just so much to this book on top of the thrilling aspect that was there, from a variety of unique species, robots, first contact, exploration, a struggle for survival, memorable characters, self-discovery, and just so much. We also get a diversity of characters from human and non-human throughout the story, along with different personality types that just made them all feel distinct from one another, and I really appreciated that touch. Now, while 2 characters do stand out in this for me, those being Denton and Eliana, I had a personal favorite, and that was Tolulo, a young Aknai. Among the rest of the cast, they were memorable, they were diverse, they had their own complexities to them, and were memorable, which I really appreciated that attention to detail to characters that may not have gotten a lot of page time, so to speak, and a balance of rivalry along with found family, which I truly adored. Now, there are time jumps in this story, and they do focus on the characters' POVs, so I actually appreciated that separation, because at the heading of each POV or chapter that we get to, we actually get an indication of which time frame we're in, and it was very easy to track and follow, and it all flowed with the storyline beautifully. Really, what this did was just give an in-depth look at the situations, the characters' involvements, all along with a natural story progression, which was again very well done. Not only does T.A. Bruno do an excellent job at capturing your imagination, I found myself curious one moment, creeped out the next, and afterwards lost in action, as the pacing just keeps you going. Now, for pacing, I will say it was medium to fast and flowed throughout the story really well, though there was one scene that did slow down in pace for me a little. I also found it to be a different tone and a bit trope heavy for my liking, but overall it does work really well with the character development and story progression that was aimed for. It just personally wasn't to my liking. Now, I did listen to the audiobook along with the ebook, and it was really well done. I'd highly recommend trying out the audiobooks. The ebook is also beautiful as there are illustrations included throughout the book. I believe for the physical copies, those images are there too, so it was just a nice inclusion to have while reading to help with the visualization. Overall, I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. It is a fantastic sci-fi I recommend for any sci-fi reader out there, or if you're looking to try sci-fi, I definitely recommend this for you as well. I'm looking forward to book 2. Next was In the Shadow of Ruins by Tony Debajo. Now, I've already done a full spoiler-free review for this. I'll leave a link up in the cards where you can find that if you're interested, so I'll try and keep this one short. But this is a self-published historical fiction, the first book in the Fractured Kingdoms series, and a gripping debut. There is a hint of fantasy to this, but the main aspect of it is historical fiction, and a little sprinkling of fantasy in there throughout. This is a retelling of a West African folklore that the author grew up with, and I love that aspect with it. The prose also captures the tone and the culture beautifully, along with immersing you into this story. It made for a beautiful combination. This brings you into the struggle between two half-brothers, King Jide and Prince Olise, and their conflict for the throne of Yoruba. This is a multi-POV story with lots of political intrigue, some magic mixed in there, and along with a lot of great action scenes. It did take me some time to get invested in the characters, but by the time I had finished the book, I really felt like I connected with some of them, and I'm really eager to see what happens in the next book of the series. With so many interwoven plots and storylines and just all the different things happening in this book, there is a lot to pull away from it and a lot to enjoy. I also really appreciated King Jide and Prince Olise's personality differences. Because they are so different from one another, their choices, how things are impacted because of those choices, were very contrastly different. So I love seeing that diversity between two brothers, the reasoning why they go about things the way they do, and just how their personality affects the storyline around it. Similar to The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu, I did find the prose a little bit tricky to get used to in the first bit. Once I got used to it though, I was hooked and I really wanted to keep reading. Now, I did listen to this on audiobook, and the audiobook is beautifully done too. So if you are having some trouble with the ebook or a physical copy, definitely try the audiobook out. It just gives you more of the experience of the prose and how the story might be told when you're sitting around a campfire. There was plenty of action, battles, lore, there's betrayals. There was just a lot to this and a lot to enjoy. So if you are a historical fiction fan, this is one I would highly recommend. Overall, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the continuation of the series to see what happens. The next book I read was one that I was eager to get to after discovering this author, and that is Flames of Rebellion by Aaron S. Jones. Now, this is book 1 in the Broken Gods trilogy and follows different characters throughout, 2 of which are Arden, a young boy in the Borderlands who's grown up around quite violent people and is just discovering who he is and maybe learning that there's more to him than he thinks. He is also a nomadic mage who, while he was born a mage, doesn't necessarily have the ability to use his magic. In addition, we get Katarina Kane, who is a retired inspector in Arcanea. Now, unfortunately, she gets thrust back into her life of solving crimes when someone she knew from her past shows up murdered. On top of all of this, the Empire of Light, which is a distant kingdom, is tightening its grip across the land, All the while, a rebellion is stirring, and there is just so much happening in this book. Now, this is a self-published grimdark fantasy filled with rebellions, magic, lore, zealots, political intrigue. There's a lot going on here. Not to mention, this is all mixed into a diverse world with differences in kingdoms and just a lot of depth and thought put through into the history of the world too. We also get a great cast of diverse characters who felt distinct from one another, all in this cold, harsh world. In this, we get 5 POVs: Arden, a young boy who is discovering his place in the world; Katarina Kane, the retired inspector from the United Cities of Arcania; Sly from the Borderlands, a pretty brutal warrior; and we also get Cypher, a torturer from Arcania; and Alistair, who's returned home from battle. So far, I am loving Aaron S. Jones' writing of characters. They feel complicated. Nothing is black or white. There's some gray in there. They're well thought through and oftentimes get amazing character development. Now, I'm not done this series. I recently finished The Path of Chaos, which is book 2, but so far the character work is phenomenal. With how Aaron S. Jones writes characters, I'm really eager to see how their character arcs are going to turn out over the course of the trilogy. Now, some of these characters were reminiscent of Joe Abercrombie's characters, Glocka and Logan, in some similar ways, but they definitely felt very different from those characters as well, in the sense that they had a darker side to them, or their personalities were a bit different, but just enough to remind me of Glocka and Logan. This ultimately is the tale of a kingdom that is on the verge of rebellion. Its people, the Magi, have been oppressed by this kingdom, and it is on the brink of rebelling against their rulers. Along with that, war is threatening the fragile peace of this kingdom, and this world just had a dark, gritty feel to it in a medieval setting. For pacing, it was medium to fast, and I often found myself theorizing as there are hints and mystery placed in throughout this book, even early on. I often found myself feeling for the character situations or just on the edge of my seat wanting to know what was going to happen next. I will say the prose is accessible as it was easy to read, and you're also pulled in really quick to the story as mystery is built in early on. Something else I really appreciate with his writing is the fact that he can create such a wide variety of side characters that feel just as important or as well developed as the main characters in many ways. Unfortunately, there was just one part that didn't quite feel as well developed as I would have liked it to be. I can't talk about it without being spoilery, so I'm just gonna say that book 2 does handle it a bit better in the sense of how it's developed, and I'm hoping book 3 gives us even more of that. Overall, I give this 4 out of 5 stars. We see lots of action, interpersonal conflicts. There are some morally gray characters in this, along with political intrigue, religious influences, great character work, and a high-stakes plot. I would highly recommend this for any grimdark fantasy fan out there or fans of Joe Abercrombie, because this, oh, it is so good. And Passive Chaos, spoiler alert, I really enjoyed that one too. Next, I read A Touch of Light by Thiago Abdalla. Now, I originally bought this because, yes, it sounded great, but the cover was gorgeous and I needed it on my shelf. Now, I am happy to report that it's not just a beautiful cover, it's also a fantastic fantasy. This was an enthralling debut from the author and kept me theorizing. I'm still theorizing. It's September. I read this in July. I still think about all of the different things that could be happening or where the plot lines are going to go. I am still theorizing. I digress. This is a self-published fantasy that just has a lot of action, political intrigue. We get griffins as the magical creature in this. And on top of that, there's religious influences that kind of seem like they mix in with the political intrigue. in a different way, which I really appreciated. This story takes place in the world of Avarin, and the back of the book here actually has 3 great taglines that I want to read you, and that is, how far would you go to resurrect someone you love? How long could you run from your past? Would you change who you are to show you belong? I feel like this captures the story so well from the 3 different POVs that we get. And this takes place in a world that has very different cultures all across Avarin, which is the world we see built here, in the sense that they worship different religions that are very contrasting to one another. Where one kingdom worships life, another values death and the importance that death brings to the world and their culture. The dynamic between the two definitely brings a rift and various conflicts into the story, and how each culture and characters we get to see throughout that are impacted. Now, while there is a resurrection trope in this, I have to say it didn't feel like a heavy trope. It felt different. And it didn't feel like the main focus, as there is just so much more going on in this book. Throughout the story, we follow 3 POVs. Adrian, who is a prince of one of the domain nations, Lynn, an elite warrior in hiding, and Nasha, fighting for her place in Ronar, and also hiding a secret. Each character brought through a unique view into the story from various religious differences, cultural differences, and internal struggles. Their individual character developments were captivating, and I have to say the start of their character arcs was really intriguing. I'm curious to see how all of that is going to be played out over the course of the series, because the characters definitely have me intrigued. Now, I didn't have a particular favorite one over the other. I really liked all of them and the complexities that they each had. Now, the conflicts that take place because of these religious beliefs or cultural differences were really well explored. And we get characters who lead eternal lives, which is a really interesting twist. All the while, there is a strange madness that is breaking out amongst the people of the world. A Touch of Light has intricate plot lines and high stakes, which made it really easy to get lost into the pages. For pacing, it was medium throughout, though I did come across quite a few moments where I found myself holding my breath in anticipation of what would happen next. This also sets up for book 2 in the Ashes of Avarin series. Now, if you missed it, Thiago Abdalla recently made an announcement on Twitter sharing some placeholder images for the covers of the next 3 books, along with the titles and anticipated release dates. I'll pop some on the screen or leave a link down below if you're interested in learning more, but they look and sound amazing. That's all I'm going to say about that. Now, I did read the hardcover along with the audiobook narrated by Kevin Kemp, and he did an amazing job of narrating this story, and it just gave the characters more depth, it felt like, as he brought them to life from the pages. I have to say, Thiago certainly started his writing career off with a bang, and quite recently was just nominated as a SPFBO semifinalist for 2022. I can't wait to see how Thiago's writing is going to continue to grow and hopefully get some answers to the theories that I have. I'd highly recommend this for any fantasy reader out there, and overall I give it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Unsouled by Wight. I've heard a lot about this series, I've heard a lot of good things, and I was really eager to get into it. Now, this is another indie book or self-published book, and it is a fantasy. We follow Lyndon, a young boy who is unsouled, essentially meaning he has no clear purpose in life amongst his people. As a result, he's treated pretty terribly and as expendable, which was a bit horrifying to see for a young child. He's the underdog who continues to try and better himself and prove his worth. This definitely had an anime feel to it, along with some similar tropes, so I really appreciated that setting and how it was communicated. And the story was engaging while also being fast-paced, which made this an easy and quick read. An aspect that I found really interesting with Lyndon's story is how we see his experience with his people. Because he is deemed with no purpose, essentially worthless, the ridicule and the resentment, and how his people, his own family, treat him as a result was really interesting. I really enjoyed seeing the society and interactions that resulted as a part of this world. However, the way that Lyndon navigates a lot of this ridicule and these hurdles just did not feel satisfying for me. I also found that the characters felt a bit two-dimensional for me, in the sense that they seemed predictable or lacked depth. Mind you, this is book 1 in a series with, I believe, 11 books, so a lot of that could change over the course of the series. However, for this installment, the plot definitely seemed like the focus as opposed to a character-driven story. Now, the prose is accessible and the story fast-paced, so this did make for a quick read at 289 pages, I believe, or about 8 hours in audiobook. Now, I did read this as the ebook along with the audiobook narrated by Travis Baldree, and again, Travis Baldree just seems to be nailing it out of the park. I know that he's become quite popular, but I love his audiobook narrations and the voices and just the love that you can tell he puts into all of the narrating of books that he does. Now, I did read the ebook along with the audiobook, and this was narrated by Travis Baldree, who also wrote Legends and Lattes and is a professional narrator. Now, Travis Baldree definitely does a phenomenal job in this and does the characters justice. With this being fast-paced and full of action, I did end up being able to read this in one day, which does give me a bit of hope for the rest of the series. This had an interesting world building along with hierarchy, sacrifice, and an underdog who strives to become the most powerful, again in an Asian anime style. This did have elements that reminded me of Dragon Ball Z and Naruto. Overall, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It definitely was enjoyable and entertaining. It just lacks some of the depth in the character work that I typically enjoy in books, and some of the storyline choices just didn't quite work for me. Now, that being said, there are many more books in this series, so there are a lot more opportunities to explore those elements later on. There's 2 books left, so hang in there. The next book that I read was Starbinder by Mark Timmony. Now, this is a loose prequel to The Blood of the Spear, which the author also wrote, and I recently read. I will be talking about that in upcoming videos, but first, Starbinder. This is a self-published fantasy novella that has a classic fantasy feel to it. We follow a young girl called Rayana and the fate that the stars have set out for her. I thoroughly enjoyed the depth and intricacy of the world building in this. For an author to be able to introduce a complex world in a novella in a way that doesn't info dump and flows naturally with the story just tells you a lot about their skill. I found myself pulled into the mystery of the Sundering and the Shalue Starbinders. Mark quickly pulls you into the story and had me invested early on. I quickly found myself pulled into the mystery of the Sundering and the Shalue Starbinders. Mark's writing made it easy to fall into this world, but also left me wanting more. The characters we're introduced to were compelling, and I felt myself invested early on. My only complaint is that this ended too quickly. There's magical beings in this, an interesting magic system, compelling characters, and honestly, all around a good classic fantasy read. One I would recommend for any fantasy lovers out there, especially those who love classic fantasy stories. This also made a great introduction to The Blood of the Spear, which I read afterwards. I felt like this eased me into the world and gave me an idea of what to expect from the chunker that The Blood of the Spear is. Overall, I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. A nice little tidbit as well is if you're interested in trying this but you're not quite sure, the author has made the ebook free when you sign up for their email mailing list. So if you are interested in that, I'll leave a link down below where you can find their sign up and try the ebook for yourself. The last book we have here is another novella, and this one was an arc kindly sent to me from the author in exchange for an honest review, and that was The Battle That Was Lost by Michael S. Jackson. This is a loose prequel prequel in a way to The Path and the Way in the Ringlander series. Now, I devoured this fantasy novella in a single sitting. Again, this is self-published. This was a fast-paced, engaging, action-packed novella that follows the Battle of Drakemire. Now, while we see some of the characters from The Path and the Way, we also get introduced to a new character, Stagrim, who is a bastard for hire and has a high value on coin. As this is a novella set in the world of Rengus, I would actually recommend reading The Path and the Way first, just because Michael S. Jackson's writing of world building and the variety of cultures are so in depth, and I feel like you can best appreciate it by reading The Path and the Way first and then going into this. That being said, you don't necessarily have to read The Path and the Way first. I just think it would be a more enriching experience when you're going into this series and the world. However, if you're looking for an epic, fast-paced entry into the world of Rengus, this is definitely the place to start if you're not worried about world building. The battle scenes were gripping, the interactions between characters were fantastic, some of the scenarios that came up, they were phenomenal. And on top of that, being able to get more history to some of the characters we see from The Path and the Way, I truly appreciated, as I felt like it gave them more depth. This is definitely a must-read for any fantasy fan out there, especially if you are interested in Michael S. Jackson's The Path and the Way. Overall, I give this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I'd highly recommend this for any fantasy reader out there. And I have to say, this made me very eager for book 2, which is not yet released. Unfortunately, it is still in the writing stage, as I understand, but boy, am I now excited to read more, as I feel like the writing got better here too. Kayla from the future here. I realized when I was editing this that the outro actually had a big problem with the video that I could not reconcile, so I am re-recording it. But also something else happened in the time that I recorded it, and that is a cover reveal for The Battle That Was Lost. I'm going to share it here. Look at this cover. It is beautiful. So this was a long wrap up. There were a lot of books that I wanted to talk about and share with you all. So I think in future I might end up breaking up my wrap ups, if they're this long again, into 2 parts, just so it doesn't become cumbersome. I prefer to try and keep the videos short for you so that you're not sitting there for a half hour watching videos. I'd love to hear what you read in July though. Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. Did you have a new favorite that you found in July? As always, thank you for watching and take care of yourselves.